Hi guys, thanks for coming back to see what's going on with Captain Bill and Trot. We're going to read chapter 3 and maybe chapter 4 of The Scarecrow of Oz by L.Frank Baum. So if you remember yesterday when we left off, Captain Bill and Trot had found themselves in quite an adventure. They got caught in a whirlpool and sucked down into a cavern, and there was a black hole and nobody knew quite what was going on. At the very end of the chapter, they were greeted by this strange animal. So we're going to find out what's going on with them as we start chapter 3 of The Scarecrow of Oz. Chapter 3, The Orc. The eyes that regarded them as the creatures stood dripping before them were bright and mild in expression, and the queer addition to their party made no attempt to attack them and seemed quite as surprised by the meeting as they were. "I wonder," whispered Trot, "what it is." "Who, me?" exclaimed the creature in a shrill, high-pitched voice. "Why, I'm an orc." "Oh," said the girl, "what is an orc?" "I am," he repeated, a little proudly as he shook the water from his funny wings. "And if ever an orc was glad to be out of the water and on dry land again, you can be mighty sure that I'm that especial individual orc." "Have you been in the water long?" inquired Captain Bill, thinking it only polite to show an interest in the strange creature. "Why, this last ducking was about 10 minutes, I believe, and that's about 9 minutes and 60 seconds too long for a comfort," was the reply. "But last night I was in an awful pickle, I assure you. The whirlpool caught me." "You were in a whirlpool too?" asked Trot eagerly. He gave her a glance that was somewhat reproachful. "I believe I was mentioning the fact, young lady, when you desired to interrupted me," said the orc. "I am not usually careless in my actions, but that whirlpool was so busy yesterday that I thought I'd see what mischief it was up to. So I flew a little too near, and the suction of the air drew me down into the depths of the ocean. Water and I are natural enemies, and it would have conquered me this time had not a bevy of pretty mermaids come to my assistance and dragged me away from the whirling water far up into a cavern where they deserted me." "Why, that's the same thing that happened to us," cried Trot. "Was your cavern like this one?" "I haven't examined this one yet," answered the orc, "but if they happen to be alike, I shudder at our fate, for the other one was a prison with no outlet except by means of the water. I stayed there all night, however, and this morning I plunged into the pool as far down as I could go and then swam as hard as I could and as far as I could. The rocks scraped my back now and then, and I barely escaped the clutches of an ugly sea monster, but by and by I came to the surface to catch my breath and found myself here. That's the whole story, and as I see you have something to eat, I entreat you to give me a share of it. The truth is, I'm half starved." With these very words, the orc squatted down beside them. Very reluctantly, Captain Bill drew another biscuit from his pocket and held it out. The orc promptly seized it in one of its front claws and began to nibble the biscuit in his mouth, much the same manner as a parrot might have done. "We haven't much grub," said the sailor man, "but we're willing to share it with the comrade in distress." "That's right," returned the orc, cocking his head sideways in a cheerful manner, and then, for a few minutes, there was silence while they all ate of the biscuits. After a while, Trot said, "I've never seen or heard of an orc before. Are there many of you?" "We are rather few and exclusive, I believe," was the reply. "In the country where I was born, we are the absolute rulers of all living things, from ants to elephants." "What country is that?" asked Captain Bill. "Orkland," replied the orc. "Where does it lie?" "I don't know exactly. You see, I have a restless nature for some reason, while all the rest of my race are quiet and content. Orcs are seldom stray far from home. From childhood days, I loved to fly long distances away, although father often warned me that I would get into trouble by doing so. 'It's a big world, Flipper, my son,' he would say, and I've heard that in parts of it live queer two-legged creatures called men, who war upon other living things and would have little respect for even an orc." This naturally aroused my curiosity, and after I had completed my education and left school, I decided to fly out into the world and try to get a glimpse of the creatures called men. So I left home without even saying goodbye an act I shall always regret. Adventures were many, I found. I sighted men several times, but have never before been so close to them as now. Also, I had to fight my way through the air, for I met gigantic birds with fluffy feathers all over them, which attacked me fiercely. Besides, it kept me busy escaping from floating airships. In my rambling, I had lost all track of distance or direction, so that when I wanted to go home, I had no idea where my country was located. I've now been trying to find it for several months, and it was during one of my flights over the ocean that I met the whirlpool and became its victim. Trot and Cap'n Bill listened to this recital with much interest, and from the friendly tone and harmless appearance of the orc, they judged he was not likely to prove so disagreeable a companion as at first they had feared he might be. The orc sat upon its haunches, much as a cat does, but used the finger-like claws of its front legs almost as cleverly as if they were hands. Perhaps the most curious thing about the creature was its tail, or what ought to have been its tail. This queer arrangement of skin, bones, and muscle was shaped like the page turn. The pellers on boats and airships having a fan-like surfaces and being pivoted to its body. Cap'n Bill knew something of mechanics, and observing the propeller-like tail of the orc, he said, "I suppose you're a pretty swift flyer." "Yes, indeed," the orcs are admitted to be kings of the air. "Your wings don't seem to amount to much," remarked Trot. "Well, they are not very big," admitted the orc, waving the 4 hollow skins gently to and fro, "but they serve to support my body in the air while I speed along by means of my tail. Still, taken all together, I'm very handsomely formed, don't you think?" Trot did not like to reply, but Cap'n Bill nodded gravely. "For an orc," he said, "you're a wonder. I've never seen one before, but I can imagine you're as good as any." That seemed to please the creature, and it began walking around the cavern, making its way easily up the slope. While it was gone, Trot and Cap'n Bill each took another sip from the water flask to wash down their breakfast. "Why, here's a hole, an exit, an outlet," exclaimed the orc from above. "We know," said Trot. "We found it last night." "Well, then, let's be off," continued the orc, after sticking its head into the black hole and sniffing once or twice. "The air seems fresh and sweet, and it can't lead us up to any worse place than this." The girl and the sailor man got up and climbed to the side of the orc. "We'd about decided to explore the hole before you came," exclaimed Cap'n Bill, "but it's a dangerous place to navigate in the dark, so wait till I light a candle." Oh, there's Cap'n Bill, lighting a candle, getting ready to go explore the hole in the dark. "What is a candle?" inquired the orc. "You'll see in a minute," said Trot. The old sailor drew one of the candles from his right side pocket and the tin matchbox from his left side pocket. When he lighted the match, the orc gave a startled jump and eyed the flame suspiciously. But Cap'n Bill proceeded to light the candle, and the action interested the orc very much. Light, it said somewhat nervously, "is valuable in a hole of this sort. The candle is not dangerous, I hope." "Sometimes it burns your fingers," answered Trot, "but that's about the worst it can do, except to blow out when you don't want it to." Cap'n Bill shielded the flame with his hand and crept into the hole. It wasn't any too big for a grown man, but after he had crawled a few feet, it grew larger. Trot came close behind him, and then the orc followed. "Seems like a regular tunnel," muttered the sailor man, who was creeping along awkwardly because of his wooden leg. The rocks, too, hurt his knees. For nearly half an hour, the three moved slowly along the tunnel, which made twists and turns, and sometimes slanted downwards and sometimes upward. Finally, Cap'n Bill stopped short with an exclamation of disappointment and held the flickering candle far ahead to light the scene. "What's wrong?" demanded Trot, who could see nothing because the sailor's form completely filled the hole. "Why, we've come to the end of our travels, I guess," he replied. "Is the hole blocked?" inquired the orc. "No, it was not," replied Cap'n Bill sadly. "I'm on the edge of a precipice. Wait a minute, and I'll move along and let you see for yourselves. Be careful, Trot, not to fall." Then he crept forward a little and moved to one side, holding the candle so that the girl could see and follow him. The orc came next, and now all three knelt on a narrow ledge of rock which dropped straight away and left a huge black space which the tiny flame of the candle could not illuminate. Said the orc, peering over the edge. "This doesn't look very promising, I'll admit, but let me take your candle and I'll fly down and see what's below us." "Aren't you afraid?" asked Trot. "Certainly I'm afraid," responded the orc. "But if we intend to escape, we can't stay on this shelf forever, so I noticed you poor creatures cannot fly, and it's my duty to explore the place for you." Cap'n Bill handed the orc the candle, which had now burned to about half its length. The orc took it in one claw rather cautiously, and then tipped its body forward, slipped over the edge. They heard a queer buzzing sound as the tail revolved and a brisk flapping of the peculiar wings. But they were more interested just then in following with their eyes the tiny speck of light which marked the location of the candle. This light first made a great circle, then dropped slowly downwards. Suddenly was extinguished, leaving everything before them black as ink. "Hi there! How did that happen?" cried the orc. "It blew out, I guess," shouted Cap'n Bill. "Fetch it here." "I can't see where you are," said the orc. So Cap'n Bill got out another candle and lighted it, and its flame enabled the orc to fly back to them. It alighted on the edge and held out the bit of the candle. "What made it stop burning?" asked the creature. "The wind," said Trot. "You must be more careful this time." "What's the place like?" inquired Cap'n Bill. "I don't know yet, but there must be a bottom to it, so I'll try to find it." With this, the orc started out again, and this time slank downward more slowly. Down, down, down it went until the candle was a mere spark. Then it headed away to the left, and Trot and Cap'n Bill lost all sight of it. In a few minutes, however, they saw the spark of the light again, and as the sailors still held the second lighted candle, the orc made straight toward them. It was only a few yards distant when suddenly it dropped the candle with a cry of pain, and next moment alighted fluttering wildly upon the rock ledge. "What's the matter?" asked Trot. "It bit me," wailed the orc. "I don't like your candles." The thing began to disappear slowly as soon as I took it out of my claw, and it grew smaller and smaller until just now it turned and bit me. A most unfriendly thing to do. Oh, ouch, what a bite." "That's the nature of candles, I'm sorry to say," explained Cap'n Bill with a grin. "You have to handle it mighty careful. But tell us, what did you find down there?" "I found a way to continue our journey," said the orc, nursing tenderly the claw which had been burned. "Just below us is a great lake of black water, which looks so cold and wicked that it made me shudder. But away at the left there's a big tunnel which we can easily walk through. I don't know where it leads to, of course, but we must follow it and find out." "Why, we can't get to it," protested the little girl. "We can't fly as you do, you must remember." "No, that's true," replied the orc musingly. "Your bodies are built very poorly, and it seemed to me, since all you can do is crawl upon the earth's surface, you may ride upon my back, and in that way I can promise you a safe journey to the tunnel." "Are you strong enough to carry us?" asked the Cap'n Bill doubtfully. "Yes, indeed, I'm strong enough to carry a dozen of you, but if you find a place to sit," was the reply, "there's only room between my wings for one at a time. I'll have to make 2 trips." "All right, I'll go first," decided Cap'n Bill. He lit another candle for Trot to hold while they were gone, and to light the orc on his return to her. And then the old sailor got upon the orc's back, where he sat with his wooden legs sticking straight out sideways. "If you start to fall, clasp your arms around my neck," advised the creature. "If I start to fall, it's good night and pleasant dreams," said Cap'n Bill. "All ready?" asked the orc. "Start the buzztail," said the Cap'n Bill with a tremble in his voice. But the orc flew away so gently that the old man never tottered in his seat. Trot watched the light of Cap'n Bill's candle till it disappeared in the far distance. She didn't like to be left alone on this dangerous ledge with a lake of black water hundreds of feet below her, But she was a brave little girl and waited patiently for the return of the orc. It came even sooner than she had expected, and the creature said to her, "Your friend is safe in the tunnel. Now then, get aboard and I'll carry you to him in a jiffy." I'm not sure many little girls would have cared to take that awful ride through the huge black cavern on the back of a skinny orc. Trot didn't care for it herself, but it just had to be done, and so she did it as courageously as possible. Her heart beat fast, and she was so nervous she could scarcely hold the candle in her fingers as the orc sped it swiftly through the darkness. It seemed like a long ride to her, yet in reality the orc covered the distance in a wonderfully brief period of time, and soon Trot stood safely beside Cap'n Bill on the level floor of the big arched tunnel. The sailor man was very glad to greet his little comrade again, and both were grateful to the orc for his assistance. "I don't know where the tunnel leads to," remarked Cap'n Bill, "but it surely looks more promising than that other hole we crept through." "When the orc is rested," said Trot, "we'll travel on and see what happens." "Rested!" cried the orc, as scornful as his shrill voice would allow. "That bit of flying didn't tire me at all. I'm used to flying days at a time without ever once stopping." "Well, then, let's move on," proposed the captain. He still held in his hand one lighted candle, so that Trot blew out the other flame and placed her candle in the sailor's big pocket. She knew it was not wise to burn 2 candles at once. The tunnel was straight and smooth and very easy to walk through, so they made good progress. Trot thought that the tunnel began about 2 miles from the cavern where they had been cast by the whirlpool. But now it was impossible to guess the miles traveled, for they walked steadily for hours and hours without any change in their surroundings. Finally, Cap'n Bill stopped to rest. "There's something queer about this here tunnel, I'm certain," he declared, wagging his head dolefully. "Here's 3 candles gone already, and only 3 more left us, yet the tunnel's the same as it was when we started. And how long it's going to keep up, no one knows." They've had quite an adventure so far, haven't they? "Couldn't we walk without a light?" asked Trot. "The way seems safe enough." "It does right now," was the reply, "but we can't tell when they are likely to come to another gulf or something just as dangerous. In that case, we'd be killed before we knew it." "Suppose I go ahead," suggested the orc. "I don't fear a fall, you know, and if anything happens, I'll call out and warn you." "That's a good idea," declared Trot, and Cap'n Bill thought so too. So the orc started off ahead, quite in the dark, and hand in hand the 2 of them followed. When they had walked in this way for a good long time, the orc halted and demanded food. Cap'n Bill had not mentioned food because there was so little left. Only 3 biscuits and a lump of cheese about as big as his 2 fingers. But he gave the orc half of a biscuit, sighing as he did so. The creature didn't care for the cheese, so the sailor divided it between himself and Trot. They lighted a candle and sat down in the tunnel while they ate. "My feet hurt me," grumbled the orc. "I'm not used to walking, and this rocky passage is so uneven and lumpy that it hurts me to walk upon it." "Can't you fly along?" asked Trot. "No, the roof is too low," said the orc. After the meal, they resumed their journey, which Trot began to fear would never end. When Cap'n Bill noticed how tired the little girl was, he paused and lighted a match and looked at his big silver watch. "Why, it's night," he exclaimed. "We've tramped all day and still we're in this awful passage, which maybe goes straight through the middle of the world, and maybe is a circle, in which case we can keep walking till doomsday. Not knowing what's before us so well as we know what's behind us, I propose we make a stop now and try to sleep till morning." "That will suit me," asserted the orc with a groan. "My feet are hurting me dreadfully, and for the last few miles I've been limping with pain." "My foot hurts too," said the sailor, looking down at his smooth place on the rocky floor to sit down. "Your foot!" cried the orc. "Why, you've only one to hurt, while I have 4. So I suffer 4 times as much as you possibly can. Here, hold the candle while I look at the bottoms of my claws." "I declare," he said, examining them by the flickering light, "there are bunches of pain all over them." "Perhaps," said Trot, who was very glad to sit down beside her companions, "perhaps you've got corns." "Corns? Nonsense! Orcs never get corns," protested the creature, rubbing its sore feet tenderly. Then maybe they're what do you call them, Captain Bill's? Something about Pilgrim's Progress, you know? Bunions, said Captain Bill. Oh yes, maybe you've got bunions. It is possible, mourned the orc, but whatever they are, another day of such walking on them would drive me crazy. I'm sure they'll feel better by the morning, said Captain Bill encouragingly. Go to sleep. Try to forget your sore feet. The orc cast a reproachful look at the sailor man who didn't see it. Then the creature asked plaintively, Do we eat now or do we starve? There's only half a biscuit left for you, answered Captain Bill. No one knows how long we'll have to stay in the dark tunnel where there's nothing whatever to eat, so I advise you to save that morsel of food till later. Give it to me now, demanded the orc. If I'm going to starve, I'll do it all at once, not by degrees. Captain Bill produced the biscuit, and the creature ate it in a trice. Trot was rather hungry and whispered to Captain Bill that she'd take part of her share, but the old man secretly broke his own half biscuit in two, saving Trot's share for another time of greater need. He was beginning to be worried over the little girl's plight, and long after she was asleep and the orc was snoring in a rather disagreeable manner, Captain Bill sat with his back to a rock and smoked his pipe. He tried to think of some way to escape from this seemingly endless tunnel, but after a time he also slept, for hobbling on a wooden leg all day was tiresome, and there in the dark slumbered the three adventurers for many hours until the orc roused himself and kicked the old sailor with one foot. It must be another day, he said. Here's a picture of Captain Bill sitting by the wall thinking, trying to figure out what's going to happen with them. Whew, chapter 3 is a long chapter. Oh, well, that was the end of chapter 3, and now we have chapter 4. I think we'll go ahead and read one more chapter. Daylight at last. And there's Captain Bill with the orc over his shoulder. Captain Bill rubbed his eyes, lit a match, and consulted his watch. 9 o'clock. Yes, I guess it's another day. Sure enough. Shall we go on? He asked. Of course, replied the orc. Unless this tunnel is different from everything else in the world and has no end, we'll find a way out of it sooner or later. The sailor gently wakened Trot. She felt much rested, but her long sleep, and sprang to her feet eagerly. Let's start, Captain, was all she said. They resumed the journey and had only taken a few steps when the orc cried, Wow! And made a great fluttering of its wings and whirling of its tail. The others, who were following a short distance behind, stopped abruptly. What's the matter? Asked Captain Bill. Give us a light, was the reply. I think we've come to the end of the tunnel. Then, while Captain Bill lighted a candle, the creature added, If that is true, we needn't have wakened so soon, for we were almost at the end of this place when we went to sleep. The sailor man and Trot came forward with a light. A wall of rock really faced the tunnel, but now they saw that the opening made a sharp left turn to the left. So they followed on by a narrower passage and then made another sharp turn, this time to the right. Blow out the light, Captain, said the orc in a pleased voice. We've struck daylight. Daylight at last! A shaft of mellow light fell almost at their feet as Trot and the sailor turned the corner of the passage. But it came from above, and raising their eyes, they found they were at the bottom of a deep rocky well with the top far above their heads, and here the passage ended. For a while they gazed in silence, at least two of them being filled with dismay at the sight, but the orc merely whistled softly and said cheerfully, That was the toughest journey I ever had the misfortune to undertake, and I'm glad it's over. Yet unless I can manage to fly to the top of this pit, we are entombed here forever. Do you think there is room enough for you to fly in? Said the little girl anxiously, and Captain Bill added, It's a straight up shaft, so I don't know how you'll ever manage it. Were I an ordinary bird, one of those horrid feathered things, I couldn't even make the attempt to fly out, said the orc. But my mechanical propeller tail can accomplish wonders, and whenever you're ready, I'll show you a trick that is worthwhile. Oh, exclaimed Trot, do you intend to take us up too? Why not? I thought, said Captain Bill, as you go first and then send somebody to help us by letting down a rope. Ropes are dangerous, replied the orc, and I might not be able to find one to reach all this distance. Besides, it stands to reason that if I can get out myself, I can also carry you two with me. Well, I'm not afraid, said Trot, who longed to be on the earth's surface again. Here's Cap'n Bill and Trot and the orc, where they suddenly ran into daylight, and they're looking upward at the hole in the ceiling. I wonder what's on the other side. Suppose we fall, suggested the captain doubtfully. Why, in that case, we would all fall together, returned the orc. Get aboard, little girl, sit across my shoulders and put both your arms around my neck. Trot obeyed, and when she was seated on the orc, Cap'n Bill inquired, How about me, Mr. Orc? Why, I think you'd be best grab hold of my rear legs and let me carry you up in that manner, was the reply. Cap'n Bill looked way up at the top of the well, and then he looked at the orc's slender, skinny legs and heaved a deep sigh. It's going to be some dangle, I guess, but if you don't waste too much time on the way up, I may be able to hang on, he said. All ready, then, cried the orc, and at once his whirling tail began to revolve. Trot felt herself rising into the air. When the creature's legs finally left the ground, Cap'n Bill's grasped two of them firmly and held on for dear life. The orc's body was tipped straight forward, and Trot had to embrace the neck very tightly to keep from sliding off. Even in this position, the orc had trouble in escaping the rough sides of the well. Several times it exclaimed, "Wow!" as it bumped its back or a wing against something jagged. But the tail kept whirling with remarkable swiftness, and the daylight grew brighter and brighter. It was indeed a long journey from the bottom to the top, yet almost before Trot realized they had come so far, they popped out of the hole and into the clear air and sunshine, and a moment later the orc alighted gently upon the ground. The release was so sudden that even with the creature's care for its passengers, Cap'n Bill struck the earth with a shock that sent him rolling heel over head, but by the time Trot had slid down from her seat, the old sailor man was sitting up and looking around him with much satisfaction. It's sort of pretty here, said he. Earth is a beautiful place, cried Trot. I wonder where on earth we are, pondered the orc, turning first one bright eye and then the other to this side and that. They found their way out. Here they are, the top on the earth. Trees there were in a plenty, and shrubs and flowers and green turf, but there were no houses. There were no paths, and there was no sign of civilization whatever. Just before I settled down on the ground, I thought I caught view of the ocean, said the orc. Let's see if I was right. Then he flew to a little hill nearby, and Cap'n Bill and Trot followed him more slowly. When they stood on the top of the hill, they could see the blue waves of the ocean in front of them, to the right of them, and to the left of them. Behind the hill was a forest that shut out their view. I hope it ain't an island, Trot, said Cap'n Bill gravely. If it is, I suppose we're prisoners, she replied. Exactly so, Trot. But even if it's better than those terrible underground tunnels and caverns, declared the girl. You're right, little one, agreed the orc. Anything above ground is better than the best that lies underground. So let's not quarrel with our fate, but be thanked we've escaped. We are indeed, she replied, but I wonder if we can find something to eat in this place. Let's explore and find out, proposed Cap'n Bill. Those trees over at the left look like cherry trees. On the way to them, the explorers had to walk through a tangle of vines, and Cap'n Bill, who went first, stumbled and pitched forward on his face. Why, it's a melon, cried Trot delightedly as she saw what had caused the sailor to fall. There's a picture of Cap'n Bill with a melon and Trot examining it closely. Cap'n Bill rose to his foot, for he was not at all hurt, and examined the melon. When he took his big jackknife from his pocket and cut the melon open, it was quite ripe and looked delicious. But the old man tasted it before he permitted Trot to eat any. Deciding it was good, he gave her a slice and then offered the orc some. The creature looked at the fruit somewhat disdainfully at first, but once he had tasted its flavor, he ate of it heartily, as did the others. Among the vines they discovered many other melons, and Trot said gratefully, Well, there's no danger of our starving, even if this is an island. Melons, remarked Captain Bill, are both food and water. We couldn't have struck anything better. Farther on, they came to the cherry trees, where they obtained some of the fruit, and at the edges of the little forest were wild plums. The forest itself consisted entirely of nut trees, walnuts, filberts, almonds, and chestnuts. So there would be plenty of wholesome food for them while they remained there. Captain Bill and Trot decided to walk through the forest to discover what was on the other side of it, but the orc's feet were still so sore and lumpy from walking on the rocks that the creature said he preferred to fly over the treetops and meet them on the other side. The forest was not large, so by walking briskly for 15 minutes they reached its farthest edge and saw before them the shore of the ocean. "It's an island, all right," said Trot with a sigh. "Yes, and a pretty island," said Captain Bill, trying to conceal his disappointment on Trot's account. "I guess, partner, if the wuss comes to the worst, I could build a raft or even a boat from those trees so we could sail away in it." The little girl brightened at this suggestion. "I don't see the orc anywhere," she remarked, looking around. Then her eyes lighted upon something and she exclaimed, "Oh, Captain Bill, isn't that a house over there to the left?" Captain Bill looked closely, saw a shed-like structure and built at one edge of the forest. "Seems like it, Trot. Not that I call it much of a house, but it's a building all right. Let's go over and see if it's occupied." There's Trot, pointing to the house. Whew. Well, friends, that's the end of chapter 4. So we know our adventurers met someone who was able to help them, and they made it out of the tunnel, and they've seen some kind of a building. So if you'll join me tomorrow for chapter 5 and maybe 6, we'll see what they're up to tomorrow. Good night.